Hey everyone, top 3 places you can't go and people who went anyways, part 8. Have you guys seen it? Because we haven't.
All right, let's jump into it.
Today's stories are more anxiety-inducing than normal, so viewer discretion is advised.
Oh boy.
But before we get into today's stories, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right channel because that's all we do, and we upload 3, 4, even 5 times every week. So if that's of interest to you, please offer to give the like button a ride home, and as soon as they get in the car, immediately start chain-smoking cigarettes with the windows
what?
up and blare techno music at full blast, and then drop them off 40 miles.
What the fuck is
Can't
that?
even do it. Blare techno music at full blast and then drop them off 40 miles away from their home. Also, please subscribe to this channel.
That's
and turn on
so
all
messed
notifications
up. What?
So you don't miss any of our weekly
Just chain
uploads.
smoke.
All right, let's get into today's stories.
Not even that. Chain smoke, windows up, loud techno music, 40 miles
And
away
then just
from
throw
home.
them out of the car.
Totally pointless ride.
Ridiculous.
Unbelievable.
On April 28th, 2000, a 24-year-old named Yuri Lipsky was standing in front of a cafe in Dahab, Egypt, overlooking the Red Sea. He had traveled all the way to the Sinai Peninsula from Moscow in order to film himself swimming through the Arch, but now it was looking like that probably wasn't going to happen. The Arch is an 85-foot-long underwater tunnel that connects a massive sinkhole right on Dahab's shoreline called the Blue Hole to the Red Sea. To get to the Arch, you need to enter the Blue Hole directly and descend straight down 181 feet, where you'll
Great, a
reach
diving
the
story.
top of the
An underwater
tunnel on the
cave,
northeast
again.
side. But there's a catch. If on your descent you happen to miss the ceiling of this arch, which apparently it's pretty easy to do, you run the risk of going too deep. Now, going too deep does not mean you're going to miss the tunnel altogether. The arch actually starts at 181 feet, but then goes all the way down to 393 feet. So it's a huge,
Oh my
huge
God.
opening. The risk of going too deep has to do with how your body responds to the type of gas you're breathing. For those who are unfamiliar with diving, generally speaking, you have 2 types of dives. There's recreational diving, where you breathe the same air that you breathe on the surface. They literally jam air directly into scuba bottles. You breathe that, and you go down to 130 feet. That's the recommended bottom depth that you would go down breathing regular air. And then there is technical diving, where you breathe a special mixture of gases. Typically, it's going to be a mixture of helium, nitrogen, and oxygen that allow you to go below 130 feet. This type of diving is exponentially more dangerous and requires all sorts of additional training. Because the minimum depth you would need to go to in order to access the arch is 181 feet, that puts you well in the technical diving range, which means you should be diving mixed gas and have special training and equipment. But year after year, people try to dive down to the arch and go through it on regular air.
Oh,
And year
man.
after year, people die doing it. When your body absorbs too much nitrogen, you can get something called nitrogen narcosis, which is a lot like being drunk. And in extreme cases, divers who get this have been known to remove their mouthpiece and inhale water, believing they are actually on the surface. Below
Jeez.
130
That
feet,
sucks.
your body absorbs nitrogen much faster, and regular air is a whopping 78% nitrogen. So the risk of getting nitrogen narcosis is exponentially higher if you're breathing regular air below 130 feet. Also, oxygen can become toxic the deeper you go in the water column. It
Really?
can lead to blackouts and convulsions that if you don't have someone there to literally physically move you up in the water column, you won't recover from it and you'll die.
my
Regular
God.
air contains 21% oxygen, which is a lot of oxygen. So if you're diving regular air below 130 feet, you are at an increased risk of developing O2 toxicity. Now, to be clear,
no.
it is possible on regular air to dive down to 181 feet and make it through the arch and come out the other side and be just fine. But you're realistically at 181 feet pushing the absolute boundary of what you can get away with on regular air. Below 200 feet, you're probably dead. So if you're attempting to swim through the arch on regular air, you need to be paying very close attention to your depth as you descend so that you don't miss the arch and accidentally drift down below 181 feet to the very deadly 200 feet and beyond. So earlier in the day, Yuri had gone down to the edge of the Blue Hole and he had found one of the diving instructors that taught inside the Blue Hole. His name was Tarek Omar, and he asked him if he'd be willing to take him down to the arch to help him film himself going through the arch.
Someone
And Tarek
teaches
said,
at this location?
Yes, but I need to train you for 2 weeks before you're going to be considered qualified to do that. and you need a special setup with a special gas mixture to do this dive. And Yuri was like, well, I'm leaving in 2 days to head back to Moscow, so I need to do this dive now. Is there any way
No.
today or tomorrow even? And Tarek was like, no, that's not how this works. And Tarek understood this more than anybody else, because in addition to teaching diving at the Blue Hole, Tarek's job was to dive down to the bottom and retrieve the dead bodies of inexperienced divers that attempted the archway and didn't make it. Although there is not an official body count.
His job is to go down there and get the bodies.
That is part of his
routine,
jobly duties.
You know what's weird? It's like, weren't there diving cave stories where, like, if people died, they just sealed it off completely?
Yeah.
Like, this place, they're like, nah, tourism.
I mean, I don't know.
Of how many people have perished inside of the Blue Hole, locals believe it's as high as 200 people just in the last decade. After Tarek was unwilling to take him without properly training him and outfitting him with the right equipment, Yuri thanked him and went on to a couple different other diving instructors with the same request. Will you take me in the next couple of days? And they all said, no, we need to train you and you need special equipment. And so finally, after no one was willing to do this, Yuri just left. Later that day, owners of cafes that overlooked the Blue Hole remember seeing a young man who was by himself walk to the edge of the Blue Hole. He puts on all of his scuba gear, he puts on a helmet and then straps a big camera to the top and ratchets it down. And then after he's got all his stuff on, he jumps into the Blue Hole and he disappears. That man was Yuri. A few days later, Yuri's family back home in Moscow did not see him get off the flight he was supposed to be on, and they reported him missing. Tarek Omar was contacted to go down into the Blue Hole and see if Yuri was down there. Tarek hopped in the Blue Hole, he went to the bottom, and sure enough, lying face down at the bottom was Yuri. When they brought Yuri to the surface, they realized his camera had been running the whole time, and he had actually filmed his final moments.
Oh my
Yuri's
God.
final video exists online, so you can watch it for yourself, but here is a description of what happens. After situating his camera on his head just the way he wanted it, he hit record, and then he jumped into the water. It was determined later on that Yuri was breathing regular air out of his tanks. The camera submerges under the water, and then Yuri begins to sink very quickly into the Blue Hole. But his breathing seems normal, and he's not thrashing around, so it seems like it's a controlled descent. But at some point, you hear Yuri trying to activate his buoyancy compensator. Basically, it's this life jacket, to describe it simply, that sits on your gear that you have a demand valve where you can inflate and deflate the air into it to neutralize your buoyancy. Or in an emergency situation, you can fully inflate it and stop yourself from sinking. In fact, you'll rise to the surface. But he's trying to activate his buoyancy compensator to slow down his descent, and the air is escaping his compensator. There's a leak, and he can't slow down his descent. Now, Yuri was wearing a weight belt, which is very common in diving. In fact, I don't really know of all that many dives that you wouldn't use a weight belt. And any diver knows that there is a quick release function on your weight belt. Specifically, if you're in an uncontrolled descent or if you're in an emergency situation and need to get to the surface, you can jettison your weight belt and go to the surface. But Yuri was panicking and he was fixated on his buoyancy compensator that he was desperately trying to activate, and it was failing. And so he's not going for his weight belt. And then he rockets past the entrance to the arch. So he goes below 181 feet, he goes below 200 feet, and he goes all the way to the bottom where he hits the bottom at 392 feet. And
he's done.
Slide, because the bottom of the Blue Hole was actually at an angle, and that archway went all the way to the bottom of the hole. And if you slipped out of the Blue Hole, it was a sheer drop-off for thousands of feet. And you see on camera, Yuri rolls over and he's desperately clawing into the mud to stop himself from sliding out of the Blue Hole to definite death. And he's trying to get himself to stop, and finally he anchors himself in the dirt. And it's calm for a second, and he's kind of looking around. It's very clear he's confused, and then it goes still. And it's believed at this point he either removed his mouthpiece because of nitrogen narcosis, he pulled it out and inhaled water, or he was dealing with O2 toxicity and he blacked out and the mouthpiece came out. But either way, he drowned.
It's like you know he's done, but then like just hearing the story, it's like hearing, because they had the video footage, it's just like crazy. Everything that could have gone wrong in that whole situation.
Everything he was warned about too.
He had the training.
Yeah.
He probably would have known about like the belt stuff.
They even said like you needed that special tank mixture, the gases.
Well, even then he was so reliant on that like was it the air thing that reinflate?
Yeah.
It just like it failed, and I think he just immediately panicked at that point. Because it's like, if that's the only thing you're aware of to get yourself to stop, then like, at that point, what are you going to do?
Right. Bummer, dude.
And then like the lower he went, like he said, you start feeling drunk. So it's like at that point, when he was at like 300, like when he was at 300, you're messed up.
Yeah.
Dogs. Swiss cheese. Oh no.
Situated an hour's drive from Johannesburg in South Africa lies Sterkfontein Cave. The
Another
cave is famous
cave?
for fossils that have been found
People.
there, and also for
They
its
had a
underground
cave.
lake, whose walls look like Swiss cheese. There's all these tunnels that spider all over the place. Many of them are unexplored, and no one knows how deep the cave actually goes. In 1984, cave diver Peter Verhusel, along with two of his friends, decided they wanted to explore these passageways in the lake, and specifically they wanted to check out a chamber called Milner Hall, which was fairly far down in the lake. There was a guideline that was anchored from the surface of the lake all the way down into the different sections that had been explored, and this was so cave divers could hold on to it and make their way through without getting lost. Not that I've ever been cave diving, but from what I've read, there is one golden rule. You never let go of the guideline. And if you do, it better be extremely well planned, and you should do it with other divers present. Peter was a notorious risk taker and was the least experienced cave diver of the three.
Oh,
When they entered
boy.
the lake, they were all holding the guideline, and Peter was the third back. And so they began descending down into the lake, and at some point, Peter's curiosity got the better of him, and he left the line to go look at the wall where there was, something he wanted to look at. And luckily, the other two divers noticed it, they saw him, and they swam over and got him and brought him back to the guideline. And even though you can't communicate underwater, I'm sure they looked at him like, come on, don't do that.
Right.
And they kept going down, and then once again, Peter's curiosity gets the better of him. He leaves the guideline and goes over and checks something else out. The other two divers notice again, they turn around, they grab him, and they pull him back.
Yeah,
and now they're
at that
looking at him
point-
like,
I'd be
you can't do
pissed.
this, no more. And so Peter's body language indicated that he got it, and he was back on the guideline, he's not gonna do it again. And they continue down, and they're getting closer to Milner Hall when the first two turn around to check on Peter, and he's gone.
Ugh.
And now previously, when they found him,
At that point, right?
Yeah.
In my head, if I've had to warn you twice,
Uh-huh.
he would be in between us.
Right.
So the friggin' person in the back keeps an eye on him, and obviously you have the person in the front that can turn around.
Like leading the way.
But it's just so frustrating.
He's like the type
when
of
you
guy you
warn-
would not want to go cave diving with. Too adventurous and not trained well enough.
And not even like they just don't follow directions, especially with something like this. It's like, dude,
This is life or death.
it's so ridiculous.
Yeah.
those other two times when he left the guideline, he was just over right against the wall, and he was easy to spot. But this time he wasn't. They're looking around with their lights, and he's nowhere to be found. And they're not prepared to go leave into one of these tunnels to go looking for him because there was so many. It was like Swiss cheese down there with all these different tunnels he could have gone into, and they didn't know which one he went in. And so after kind of waiting and looking around for a couple of minutes, thinking maybe he'll come back, they were running out of air and they had to go to the surface. So the two men surface, they call the police, they explain what happened. Rescue divers are sent to the cave to go looking for Peter, but by the time they even got there, it had been several hours. It takes a while to mount this type of surge. And Peter only had one tank of air. And so if he hasn't surfaced by now, the thought is he's drowned at this point. But the rescue divers go into the lake, they head down to the area where Peter was last seen, and they look around and they can't find him, and they surface pretty quickly. And they say, look, we're just not prepared to look through all these different tunnels he could have gone in just to find his body. Because at this point, there's no way he's alive. He's been down here for hours, he doesn't have enough air, and one of the rescue divers is gonna get trapped in one of these tunnels, and we don't wanna lose anyone, so we're terminating the search. Peter's friends are devastated, and they say, hey, can you let us go down and look for Peter's body for his family?
No.
And the police said, no, we're banning diving in this cave. 6 weeks after Peter went missing inside of this lake, a group of dry cavers were doing some work in a chamber that was right next to this underground lake. And they were chiseling this wall when all of a sudden the wall kind of collapsed, revealing another chamber on the other side of this wall. They took their flashlight out and they looked inside, and it looked like a tunnel that kind of weaved around the corner. And they shined their light on the ground, and it looked like there were some muddy or sandy footprints that were left as if someone had been walking right there. The cavers were initially terrified, the idea that there's anything living behind the walls inside of the cave.
Yeah.
But they stepped over and they walked around the corner, and it revealed this huge air pocket that clearly was connected to the underground lake, because there was water right in the middle of this air pocket, and there was no other way in besides, this wall that's collapsed. And in the middle of the water, there was this island. It was like this sandy, muddy, rocky island right in the middle of this air pocket. and laying on the island was Peter. In a stroke of luck, after Peter went missing from his dive, he had discovered this air pocket, and he had surfaced and climbed onto this island. He knew he didn't have enough air in his air tank to get to the surface again, and so he figured, okay, I'll just sit on this island. There seems to be enough air in here for me. I'll wait until my dive buddies invariably go get help and come down here and rescue me. He sat inside of that air pocket for 3 weeks waiting for a rescue that never arrived. Before he ultimately died of starvation, he wrote a message in the sand to his mother and to his wife, telling them that he loved them. To this day, diving is still prohibited inside of Sterkfontein Cave.
Damn, dude.
Yeah, see what I mean? Like, that place, they banned that. That dude messed up one time.
Yeah.
Ruined it for everyone else who explored it.
Yeah.
But they closed it off.
Yeah.
That other cave, maybe like 200 people drowned there. I don't know. Like, what?
I know. Tourist attraction.
You have
That's
when you
not-
have to hire
that's not
someone,
right.
when you have to hire someone to go retrieve bodies,
Yeah.
I feel like that's a problem.
Yeah.
That's a big red flag, you know?
Yeah.
I don't know. My thought.
A little after 1:30 in the morning on June 17th, 2017, 34 U.S. Navy sailors were asleep inside of berthing compartment number 2 on the USS Fitzgerald. Their berthing compartment was below the waterline, meaning where they were sleeping was underwater. They were sailing along through the South China Sea when all of a sudden there is this explosion in the berthing compartment and a rush of cold air. The explosion was a 30,000-ton container ship crashing into them, gouging an opening in their wall bigger than a semi-truck. Before any of the 34 sailors could make sense of what was happening, tens of thousands of gallons of seawater are pouring into their compartment. The sailors were sleeping in what they called coffin lockers, which were these bunk beds where the bunks were stacked 3 high and the lowest bunk was practically on the ground. And so as soon as the water came pouring into the room, everybody who was sleeping on a lower bunk was immediately completely submerged in water. And all the furniture inside of the space was lifted up by the rush of water, and a few unlucky sailors who were in those bottom bunks were trapped by furniture that landed right in front of their bunk. The sailors immediately jumped into action, leaping out of their bunks, pulling people out of those lower bunks. Everybody's trying to help each other out to get to the exit, which was a ladder that led up to a hatch in the ceiling. The sailors inside of this space were very close with each other. Pretty much 24 hours a day, they were always within a few feet of each other. And so that explains why, as the water was rising and rising, getting up to their necks, they formed an orderly line as they all made their way up this ladder through this hatch. As they waited in line to get out of the space, the water was getting so high that they were tilting their heads to barely be able to breathe the space that was left inside of the room. And when the water is really cold, you involuntarily open your mouth. And so water was pouring into their mouths, making it very hard to breathe. As each man climbed the ladder and went through the hatch to relative safety, they would turn around and help the next guy up. And they remembered hearing this hissing sound, which was the sound of all the air being forced out of the compartment through this hatch as it filled with seawater. And then finally, the survivors that had made it out of the hatch were able to pull the last few guys that were in line to go up the ladder. They pulled them out, and then they realized they're short 8 sailors. But they're faced with this terrible decision because they need to shut the hatch and seal it. It's a procedure inside of a sinking ship to keep it from sinking. If they don't shut this compartment, they run the risk of killing more people on board the ship. And so they decide they're going to wait for a couple of extra seconds, and they begin yelling, "Come to the sound of my voice," in hopes that anybody that's still down there could hear them through the water and would swim to them. And then before they shut it, they poked their head down and looked, and they saw a glimmer of what looked like a man swimming away from the ladder. And they're thinking, why are they swimming away? Don't they know they need to come here? And they're yelling to this person, come back, swim to our voice. And then moments later, this burly sailor from Arizona named John Meade came out of the darkness and clambered up the ladder, and they pull him out, and he's coughing and he's gagging, and he said, "Gary Ream saved me. I was behind a locker. He pulled me out." And it dawned on the 2 sailors that saw that man swimming away from the ladder farther into the compartment, that they had tried to stop, that they had tried to get back to them. That wasn't John Meade. That was Gary Ream. He was intentionally swimming back to save these guys. But now, in a cruel twist of fate, they had to seal the hatch, with Gary and 6 others still inside. At 37 years old, Gary Ream was a veteran of the ship. He referred to the other sailors as his kids, and when they were on land, he would invite them over to his house for holiday meals. He was approaching 20 years of service, and he was planning to retire soon and move back to Virginia with his family and become a fireman. Gary was asleep inside of berthing compartment number 2 when the crash happened, and instead of going up the ladder to safety, which he could have done, he was near the ladder, He instead decided to make multiple trips into the far back section of the compartment, which is where the most people were trapped by furniture, either in their bunks or in the bathroom stalls. And he went back over and over and over again, knowing full well that once this water reaches the ceiling, they are going to seal the hatch. He's been in the Navy almost 20 years. He knows the procedure. But Gary loved his kids and he was prepared to die for them. And on this day, he did. 19 of the 27 surviving sailors credit Gary for saving their life.
Wow.
So that's going to do it, guys.
What a
If you
hero.
found the secret in today's episode, let us know in the
It
comments.
was nice to end on like a heroic story.
Yeah.
God.
That's
So selfless.
crazy. To be able to just go back knowing the consequences, like, you know that there's like a possibility of closing it on you.
Yeah.
That you had to take the risk.
Yeah. And you've got like seconds to decide if that's what you're going to do.
I know.
Because water's rushing in. Incredible.
What a badass.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not going underwater anytime soon, I'll tell you that much.
No, I don't think I will
It's a
either.
lot more ocean stories than I am comfortable with.
A lot of danger happens
Yeah.
in the ocean.
All right. Well, thanks so much for watching. If you like what you saw, please subscribe. If you have any suggestions, leave them in the comments, and we'll see you in the next one.
Yeah, see ya.
Bye.